And before we started, I was just wondering, since we've never had any adults on the show, what should we call you? Like Mr. Siskel and Mr. Ebert?
Mr. Siskel, sir.
Mr. Siskel, sir? Okay, I'll call you sir.
You can just call me Roger. That'll be just fine.
Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert, two titans of cinematic review. Sometimes right, sometimes wrong, but always captivating. Your hosts Antonio of the Cult-Worthy Cinema Podcast and Justin Henson of the Movie Wire are here to take you back to the balcony. Roger is fine. Welcome, everyone, to Back to the Balcony. Here we are, like 3 or 4 episodes into Season 3. I hope you've enjoyed the new stuff we've brought you. We had our awards ceremony. We had our special tribute to Rob Reiner. We did an adventurous kids film, and now we're going into our first real special episode of the season. We are doing kind of a retrospective on a show that was, I don't know, big for me in the 80s that Siskel and Ebert guested on. Now, I'm a little bit older than my co-host Justin Henson, so I really don't know if he has experience with the show, but I'll go ahead and ask him right away before I get into my whole story. Rated K for kids by kids. The Nickelodeon film review show done by children from 1986 to 1989. Did you watch this when you were younger, or is this something new for you?
First of all, you are not that much older than me, so stop it. We are pretty damn close.
We're close, but 3 or 4 years is a lot in 80s time because so much happened in the 80s where it was like a blink of an eye, a show could be on and off the air, and then it's like a whole generation missed it. That's why I ask.
That's valid point, but honestly, no, and I've never heard of this show up until you brought it to the table, and when you sent me the clip, it is brilliant, and I wish we had more like this for more voices in media and film criticism and opinions. This is a show that I think would have succeeded if it came at a later time, especially with the social media platform.
Yeah, so like this, for me, this was huge because I was, like you, raised on Siskel and Ebert, watching it as a young kid, but also Nickelodeon was still trying to find its feet. This was before, let's say, the Nick at Night. This was before Snick and all those variety shows. And it was before Ren and Stimpy and all those Saturday morning cartoons. It's when Nickelodeon had a lot of interesting programming, like You Can't Do That on Television. And it had Nick Jr. with Eureka's Castle and stuff. It was meant for kids, but it was still trying to find a way to like have adults be involved too. And Double Dare, all those game shows, they're things that I just remember vividly. But this was the one that its 4 or 5 season run, I was just so addicted to because I was so into movies. I knew I had like a critical or analytical voice in my head. I just didn't know what to do with it. All I wanted to do was talk about movies with my parents and they could give a shit. And here was a show where a panel of kids used kid voices, kid logic, and my favorite part about this show, the pre-pretentiousness of a critical mind that actually was relatable for children to recognize what a good movie was and if it was for them. And I'm going to get to that when we get into the actual episode. But yeah, this was something that I never missed. And they had a lot of great people on for interviews. I remember Carrie Fisher being on one. I feel like Michael Paré from Eddie and the Cruisers was on an episode being interviewed. They even had music guests. I think Fine Young Cannibals was on an episode. And now that I think about it, it might have been because of the movie Tin Men, where Fine Young Cannibals was actually like the band in the movie, and they just had him be a guest on the show. You're 100% right. They took away this kind of entertainment for children that was actually the introduction to some kind of critical thinking and education for culture and media and music and movies, and then went straight to sketch comedy with all that, or went straight to the kind of gross out game shows. Entertaining as they may have been, I feel that we missed out on the opportunities that shows like this offered kids that their opinions actually mattered.
Well, not only is this relatable to what you were saying for kids, but I was relating to these kids and their opinions as I was watching this episode because they do have valid points that we see in just a singular episode that I think when we come to a lot of movies on streaming, when we come to a lot of movies in theaters, this is a time that kids need to have a voice. And I've spoken that numerous times on my show where I'm looking at kids' reactions. I'm gaining conversation pieces from kids because we'll see it and we'll get into the discussion of it that adults and kids see things a little bit differently when it comes to what the entertainment value is. And one of our critics, our kid critics, make a valid point that we'll get into. But I think this is where it's super important that we hear a voice of a vast audience and vast age groups because there are different experiences that when you watch a movie, you're going to relate to. And we see that in different age gaps. So I think this show is absolutely brilliant. I think the singular episode I watched, I want to seek out more to really gain an interest in what these kids are saying. But my only criticism of this one episode is some of these movies weren't meant for kids, but they still do a valiant effort on reviewing it from the kids' perspective, which I appreciate.
I mean, a lot of the movies they reviewed weren't for kids. I remember specifically 87 or 88, my parents took me to go see Without a Clue, the Sherlock Holmes comedy with Ben Kingsley and Michael Caine. Now, I loved it because I grew up with Michael Caine and my mom's appreciation and adoration of him. But when the episode for that came out on this show, no one knew who Michael Caine was. Like, he was making adult dramas and adult comedies and Woody Allen movies. Kids wouldn't have known who he was, and they didn't know who Ben Kingsley was back then. And they didn't understand the farce of making fun of a Sherlock Holmes type movie because, to the point that some of these kids say, they were too young to have seen Neil Simon detective movies like Murder by Death or The Cheap Detective, right? So there is like a generational gap there. But to hear a kid's opinion of a movie like that that's not for children, I thought was really fascinating. And since I had seen it and liked it, it gave me the opportunity to kind of have a dialogue with the TV screen of like, no, the movie was actually really good and funny. The same way that we have dialogues with Siskel and Ebert when we're watching their show and we disagree with their opinions of movies. And I think that is something that we definitely still miss out on. Now, granted, I know there's a lot of, let's say, local or cable access shows that had kids programming where kids might review a movie or an album or a book. It's out there, and it still kind of is out there. It's been more adopted into influencer and content creation. But back in the day, you could still find some local channels that would have like a kids panel. But this was the one that was big and got big people. And season 2 of this show, they get the essentially royalty of film criticism. Siskel and Ebert to be guests on the show. And it wasn't like even an interview. They just get right into reviewing movies with these guys, and you can see them kind of adapting to each other's energies, where it's like you see kids being kids, you see Siskel and Ebert kind of being pretentious, but by the end of the episode, they kind of find a way to meet in the middle, and I think that's the most fascinating part of this episode.
What I found fascinating is it takes probably about 45 seconds for these kids to feel comfortable with Siskel and Ebert to push back. That's where opinion really does matter in what we like in cinema, to really push back and defend your opinions on what works and what doesn't. And this is almost a concept that we should see today is we have the youth versus the older generation, because in the 80s and 90s, we've talked about this before, is there is a lot less censorship on going to the theater, experiencing adult movies, going to see RoboCop, going to see Rambo. Parents wanted that experience, and they didn't really care at that point for some adults. But this is where it's important on growth of understanding different genres. And to an extent, I respect the different perspectives that both of the 3 young critics we get and the 2 older critics we get is they're not too far apart on their opinions. It's just little nitpicking things that they didn't like. So I think it is extremely fascinating that we have these generational gaps and experience 2 critics and a trio of young critics that really do kind of meet in the middle when it comes to understanding different points of view. when it comes to how they view a movie. It is absolutely fascinating.
Now, before we get into like playing some of the clips of the movies they reviewed, I got one thing I do kind of have to say. Like, there is a caveat to all this, and here's the thing: is that this was a media corporation. Obviously, there is like a walking hand in hand with studios of we just want to get more advertising of a film out there. Just like they do with Siskel and Ebert, here's a bunch of clips, play the clips, get people excited. I can see how this show on paper looked attractive to the studios because whoever came up with it was like, oh, here is an audience that normally doesn't get into the theater the way that adults do. Like, they will drag their parents to go see Care Bears movie. They will drag their parents to go see whatever the new Disney movie is, right? But you can tell that this was, let's say, a proving ground to see if they could expand an audience for, let's say, PG and PG-13 rated movies to a younger generation. Hey, let's show these clips of these movies, let's show the trailers, and let's show people of the same age group discuss them in a language and vernacular that other kids will understand. So 100% it's a marketing ploy, but that is where I feel sometimes that's not a bad thing. Because if it wasn't for a marketing ploy, then we wouldn't get the discourse and we wouldn't get this kind of reaction and opinion from kids. So it is kind of like shaking hands with the devil, but I'm cool with it.
Well, you can tell it was almost a failed experiment because obviously kids aren't going to have the same reaction of a PG-13, rated R, or even some PG movies. Because even in this episode, you see one movie that they really kind of just all in unison kind of get involved in on just the fun factor. Because are they going to see the fun factor in a PG-13 to rated R movie in that generation? No. So it's almost a backfire that when it comes to youth understanding an adult movie, it's not a target audience that the Hollywood studios want to focus on. They're not going to sell seats with this. So I think the idea is there. And I think this is what social media does now. If we were to look at Hollywood now, yes, there's an intent. Let's just call it what it is. But there's even more social media platform for film criticism where we're doing 30-second clips to sell a movie. We're trying to feel energetic on a TikTok video to sell a movie. So there's always something there to sell something. So to kind of go down the rabbit hole of let's just keep it simple and just have the intent to tell our opinions of how we like the movie. And I think these kids do a good enough job if you take out the idea that they're gaining a paycheck through Nickelodeon, that they are giving their opinions. And I validly accept that these opinions are real with these kids because I think they're wholesome. They're not scared to push back on how they feel about a movie if they disagree with Siskel and Ebert.
Right. Okay, so let's kind of set this up before I start playing the clips. So we have our three hosts from the first two seasons. We have Matt, Mark, and Rebecca, and they have Gene and Roger on the show with them. And they covered 4 movies. Now, the sad part is whoever recorded this on YouTube, and I searched the whole internet, we only got like the first 3 full movie reviews. Making Mr. Right, Project X, and Wild Thing. And then the 4th movie they covered was Secret of My Success, which we covered on the show, but that was missing the ending and the discourse behind it. And I looked everywhere for it. It just doesn't exist on the internet. So it might be something lost in time, but at least we have the 3 movies that we can talk about. And I think that's fine because we already talked at length about Secret of My Success. So they started with Making Mr. Right. Now, before we even play the clip, is this a movie that you've seen?
It's funny because I rewatched this yesterday and I didn't even remember this movie until the last lines of John Malkovich saying, I don't get along with people. And I'm like, I've seen this damn movie before. And it just shot back as nostalgia. I remember everything that happened after that line. But that just shows how memorable this movie was for me is I remember the last 45 seconds of this movie.
And I remember watching this movie with my mom the one time as a child, and then again, maybe like 20, 30 years later, just to remember if I liked it or not. And I remember being creeped out by John Malkovich way back then as a kid. And then once he became more prominent, I think the next movie I really remember him as an actual character and an actor was Of Mice and Men, where he played Lenny. And it's an interesting take on the character, But that's the next time I saw John Malkovich. So I remembered this movie very well. And to hear them talk about, the first thing I was thinking is like, this is not a movie for kids. But that's what's great about it. It's like they were stepping outside of their comfort zone, and we could actually get the insight of what kids would actually think if they got dragged to a movie like this with their parents. So I'm going to go ahead and play that clip.
The first movie we're going to take a look at is Making Mr. Right. All right, on this one, you gave it 1 thumbs up and 1 thumbs down, and we gave it an S for sicko and an R for reject. I had some problems with this movie. I mean, first of all, the android Ulysses, he was totally annoying. His voice was so annoying throughout the whole movie. And then Frankie had the ugliest hair color I've ever seen. and then, the thing that really bothered me the most about this movie was that at the end, she fell in love with the android. Throughout this whole movie, she loves a machine. It's not Ray. And, I mean, you love your Cuisinart, but you don't want to marry it or something. But they totally fall in love, and that really made me sick. And I didn't like this movie at all. It wasn't really funny, and they tried a little too hard in certain times.
That's funny. I liked it a lot.
You liked it a lot?
Yeah.
How?
The whole point in her falling in love with the android is not that the android is a machine, but that the android is more human than the human that he's based on. So that was kind of a reverse that I found to be amusing. As for her hair color, what about her in general? I thought she was a terrific actress. Her name is Ann Magnuson. She was pert. She was smart. She was spiffy. She looked like kind of a young Susan Hayward, an actress who made movies many years ago.
Well, I couldn't tell because I was looking at her hair color the whole time.
Well, why weren't you looking at her face?
Well,
Are you a hairdresser or a movie critic?
I think that's a very fascinating interaction because two things. Number one, this is great for like marketing research for a movie company, right? Where it's like you are hearing what this age group is recognizing in a movie. They're not even looking at the story because the story is mature. So what do they look at? They look at the aesthetics of the movie, that John Malkovich is creepy and his voice is weird. I think Ann Magnuson is beautiful, and she's an amazing actress, and she has got this crazy red hair, but that's distracting for a child audience. And then on the same note, you've got a critic, a real critic, the critic of critics, kind of taking them to school. It's like, okay, what you watched in this movie was the aesthetic value, the emotions and reactions you got from, let's say, a voice that was annoying, or the idea of like, how could a woman love a robot, right? But then the nuance of the film and the analogy it's making is being laid out by the critic. So it's almost like he's taking them to school and saying, okay, I appreciate your opinion, but let me tell you what the movie's actually trying to do. And if you watched it again after we've had this debate or this discourse, you might have a whole different viewpoint on what the movie actually means and might appreciate it more. That's the kind of stuff that made me appreciate movies that I hated as a kid and wanted me to rewatch them again because someone who knew better explained it to me. And I think that's the reason why we listen to podcasts, is because there are some things that maybe we don't understand, or we want another insight, and that invites us to kind of reanalyze our opinion on something and either confirm that we hate it or be open to the idea that we actually might like it. We just didn't know how to like it.
I kind of want to fill in the blanks for this young lad. Is maybe it's not as articulate as he wants because he is distracted by the aesthetics, because there's nothing entertaining happening. We take John Malkovich as a robot, and I go back to the scene with Laurie Metcalf, where we have an entertaining scene where they're going on a date. He doesn't have any money. He's dressed in a tuxedo in the mall, and we start to learn about his conflicts of no money and just being a robot on a simplistic level. But I think what isn't entertaining about this film is we don't get enough growth from the robot. We just get a robot. We get it on an innocent, simplistic level with nothing really to kind of grow it. And by the time we get to the climax, it's still just a robot. And Frankie is there to date a robot that is almost a child, elementary. So there isn't real growth there to justify Malkovich going into space and saying, I don't get along with people, to my original statement. So I think there isn't really any entertainment value from these kids. So they have to focus on what annoys them, just like I would in a movie. So because I didn't have a problem with Frankie's hair, I thought it was kind of cool looking, but I was annoyed with everything else on the progression of our characters with this movie.
Same, but I also think that there's like a relevance to the movie now, especially like when they say like this this loneliness epidemic where it's like, yeah, I think one of the things I really liked about this movie is the idea that Frankie wants the qualities that she wants in a human companion instilled in the robot, and that's never going to happen. But she also wants the simplicity of a robot in a human person, and that's never going to happen either. So it is kind of like an Ouroboros situation. There is no real win for this without someone giving something up emotionally or physically or romantically. And I think that is the perfect analysis of dating culture of back then in the 80s. And I feel it's like, especially about dating culture now, where it's like everyone wants to like customize this relationship idea. No one wants to give up anything from themselves. So they want their partner to make the adjustments and the changes. Maybe it is a Western culture thing. This isn't a relationship podcast, but I've listened to enough of those and talked to enough people where it's like, there is a lot of interesting ideas here about human nature and romance and love and the expectations of women and the avoidance of men, but it's played through this kind of sci-fi fantasy. And I think Malkovich is perfect for that because whether he's the robot or whether he's the doctor, no one really wants to fuck this guy or live with this guy. Like, both are pretty terrible. And I think that's the point. But I like that. I like what it does. Is it way over the heads of these kids? 100%. But being able to hear a nuanced conversation between a critic and a kid, I think, is the most fascinating part about this conversation.
It really is. And I think this is where the pivotal focus goes on entertainment value. But I think the gap between the two is separating scientist from robot as well, because there isn't a big gap between these two when it comes to performance. I love John Malkovich, but at the same time, there's really no difference between them. One's elementary, one's smart, but they don't prove the point in between other than situational value. And that's where we get a lack of the entertainment value that I think between youth and adult that I think we can agree on. I think Gene would agree on this as well, is there's really nothing to separate it of interest because we needed a drastic separation between creator and creation to really have that value prop, to really have that piece to say, I'm going to root for this robot versus the situation that we see him in.
Well, and they go on.
What bothered me most of all is it's basically a three-character play. You have the scientist, the android, and the woman. And to me, the most interesting person was the woman, played by Anne Magnuson, and an interesting performance playing opposite two dullards. Both the scientist to me and the android were dull as can be. They were not interesting people. I did not care for... One second. I did not care. I did not care. I'm talking to them. You can talk to them anyway.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I'm talking with them. I did not care for any of the relationships that she had because both guys, she deserved two better guys.
So it makes sense to me that Roger liked the movie and that Gene has some reservations about it, and he explained it perfectly. The way Gene explains it, I feel, is very much what you're explaining in your criticism of the movie. And I'm a little bit more on Roger's side, where I like the whole kind of analytical study of relationships of men and women. It is pretty much something straight out of those self-help and romance books that we were talking about in the She's Out of Control episode. You know, the new religion is psychotherapy. It kind of is a play on that. And I enjoyed that, but I do see through the facade of the characters that Gene definitely has issue with. And he's not wrong. Like, there are other side characters and there's some entertaining things to it, but it really is a three-person dynamic, and it is interesting that two of those people are practically the same person.
Absolutely. And I think if we took all the side characters out, that honestly, I thought were more entertaining than our three main characters, because the situations were more entertaining. You can tell the writing surrounded around proving the innocence of this robot to gain some buy-in from the audience. And that was all driven by situations from our not our main characters. So it was all situational. And I think that's where the writing really did have a falter of separating and creating something memorable, because I think there is really nothing memorable about this movie except for the fact the outcome, and the outcome doesn't even feel really earned.
I feel that we don't have to cover this movie on our show now because we've practically covered it in this episode. But they move on to another one, a more kid-friendly, probably the most kid-friendly of the three that they discussed on the show. They jump into Project X now. Now, Project X, one of my favorite childhood movies of the 80s, directed by Jonathan Kaplan, who was from like the Roger Corman School of Filmmaking and eventually became one of the best erotic thriller filmmakers of the 90s. This is a film where we still have like a little bit of B genre movie stuff going on, where we've got animals kind of running the movie, but we have Matthew Broderick as an Air Force guy that kind of gets in trouble for stealing a plane. And his way to get back into the academy is to be a volunteer for this research group where they're teaching chimps how to fly planes for nefarious reasons. And this is the start of the conversation.
Project X. You guys gave it 1 thumbs down and 1 thumbs up. And we gave it an M for monkey fun and an F for fly. Well, I really liked Project X. I mean, first of all, it had an important message about, be unnecessary experimentation on animals. And, I really liked that because I believe in that. But it didn't, drum it into you. It wasn't save the seals, really sad, depressing. Sure, there were sad parts, and they were really well done. But the whole thing wasn't, down. It had some really funny parts, and the chimpanzees were adorable. And, I just had a good time during it.
So I think she summed that up perfectly. And this is definitely one of those 80s movies where they lure you in with this idea of animal fun, but then they really do take you kind of almost down this dramatic horror element where these chimps are being put through the ringer of nuclear war to test physiologically if they can continue a mission if they were a real pilot after suffering a nuclear shockwave, right? And it, of course, kills the chimps. There's darkness to it. And that's one of the things I think that we don't see a lot in kids or family movies of the last 20 years is that danger that is inherently real. I feel like we're less worried about nuclear war, or maybe not anymore, but for the last 20 years than we were in the 80s. Movies like Red Dawn and The Day After and Project X, where there is a reality that the world could be blown up at any minute, and this is one of the things that our government is doing to kind of help propel that war or peace. And using animals as part of their mechanism, I think, is another fascinating idea that we don't see much anymore. No one wants to put animals in danger, or they'll make animals the danger, but not putting them in danger. But she really summed it up great. This movie is a great way of bringing in the idea, the political message that war is bad, nuclear war is bad. The mechanism is cute animals, Virgil the chimp, but she also is really keen on pointing out that this isn't like your typical eco-warrior save the whales type movie that's tugging at your heartstrings almost melodramatically and loses credibility. This movie is fun and kind of silly, but there is a very strong sense of credibility of war and the reaction of war.
We can tell this was a successful family movie because if you can take war, an animal, and the messaging between it, balance it out so the kids and the dad and the mom can actually have a good time, then it's a successful movie. We don't get that.
If you can nuke a chimp in the second act and still cheer at the end, yeah, you've done your job right.
We don't get that. Like you said, we don't get that anymore because it takes too much work from the writer. It takes too much work on executing the vision. Because this is a balancing act, and I think she's absolutely right. It doesn't beat the drum too hard, but one thing I think she would have gone a little bit further with, if she could, is saying it doesn't beat the drum on either side. There is war, there is animal messaging. The two complement each other just right for a family to have a good time at the movie. It doesn't go too political, it doesn't go too deep into the animal messaging. We don't need explanation on that. We can see from the characters, we can see from the animal what the stakes are. So just have the characters, the animals, go through these conflicts and we understand. And that's what makes a simplistic family movie where you don't have to overcomplicate it. So with her, she nailed it. I agree 100%. I just wish she would have gone a little bit further with it. But I think at a youth level, she gets the assignment here.
She's got a great point coming up in a second, but also while we're talking about this movie, because we'll probably never have to cover it on the show again, this movie does something very smart. They make a singular bad guy with no empathy and no sympathy, and Bill Sadler plays that role amazingly. He's just a great villain in general. He also is my favorite death in a movie in Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. However, every adult character that's supposed to have zero empathy for these creatures at some point in the movie refuses, steps back, denies what they're doing because they care about the animals, and you leave all the accountability on one solo villain. That's a very important mechanism for a movie like this, where we can't give up on society. We can't give up on all the people, because if empathy is lost on everybody, then we are doomed as a species. And having one singular villain that shows no empathy throughout the whole movie, we can put all of our anger on that one person. And that's what makes a movie like this work, where we're not going to give up on humanity, but we can give up on that asshole. And no one has to die. None of the humans have to die in this movie to make it effective. It's just the messaging of how we can win, and what it takes for the bad guy to lose.
I absolutely love that statement. I love what you said with that, because funneling and keeping it simplistic to one singular villain while keeping a focus of there is a good human, you can't hate an animal. The animal's on screen, you're going to love it. So you just need to have a co-star alongside the animal and somebody to hate. Anything else in the background is just background. But to build that empathy, we already have it for the animal. It's going to be up to Matthew Broderick to build something alongside our chimp to actually have us care, because this is an easy formula to do. You just need to keep it simple without complicating it. And I think this movie does it extremely well.
And shout out to Helen Hunt too, because before she was, an Oscar winner and A-lister throughout the 90s, she was like cutting her teeth on genre filmmaking. She was in Trancers, she was in Girls Just Want to Have Fun, and she was in this, right? She earned her keep. She earned her A-list by doing essentially 15 years of this kind of stuff before someone actually put her in like a prestige movie. So I'm not going to leave her out of this conversation. She's amazing. Anyway, they go on.
My reaction isn't too far different from yours. I didn't recommend the movie. I didn't think it was a particularly great film. I thought, again, and this happens when you don't like a picture, you frequently call it rather predictable. You know which way it's going to go. But I will say that there were charming things. Oddly enough, you want to know what I thought the most charming thing was in the whole film? The close-up of Virgil the chimp.
What?
Simply, when you just take that tight shot of his face, it's beautiful. And what that says about animals is enough.
So, of course, he comes in with his pretty much predictable statement about predictable movies. And obviously, he was a thumbs down. Roger gave it a thumbs up, but it must have been a reluctant one. I didn't go back and watch their Project X review on their show. I'm just going off of this, but he did give it a thumbs up. But yeah, I think it's funny that he's talking about predictability when he literally just gave me the most predictable critique that Gene could
I
give.
absolutely hate this statement from Gene, because I don't want to get ahead of myself, because I know you have a clip for it. But when it comes to this formula, it doesn't have to be new. It doesn't have to be familiar. It just has to feel fresh. It has to do the job. It has to execute on the emotion of it. And he goes into this piece, and I want to get into the kids here in a second, because I don't want this to be just about Gene, but he goes on, a close-up of the chimp's face is enough. Okay, we're not going to have that for 90 minutes. We have to build stakes. Obviously, we all care about animals in film. We all care about what's going to happen to Virgil. So we get that. But the movie has to build around that. So it's not about what's going to happen. It's how we're going to get there. That's where the formula has changed, even in the 80s and 90s, with the experience of critics watching film. It is very rare, even back then, to see something that's completely fresh without utilizing a familiar formula. But it's a matter of how you feel by the time the credits roll. That is going to be the justification of the review. And that's where I think this is lost when it comes to our older critics.
Right. And they go on about this because the rest of their conversation is pretty much based on that subject.
I actually enjoyed myself a little bit more than Gene did. This is not a great movie. I think we're all agreed that it's not a great movie.
No, I disagree with you there.
But you know what it was? It was a sweet movie. It was a movie that had a lot of heart.
Yeah.
And Matthew Broderick was very good at working with chimpanzees. You know, W.C. Fields once said he would never appear, or he hated to appear in movies with children, animals, and women with plunging necklines, because nobody would ever look at him. Now, Broderick here is taking a big chance when he's surrounding himself with these really cute animals, and to be able to act with somebody who, let's face it, is not really acting with you because they have to wait and get the chimp in a separate shot to get just the right expression. Takes a certain amount of skill, and I thought he brought a lot of human qualities to it.
I thought he stole the show, really. I thought he was one of the best, most
I thought Virgil
You made Matthew Broderick's day. He'll be so happy. He stole the show from a chimpanzee.
Now, there is something interesting about that response from Roger. Like I said, he gave it a thumbs up and reluctant, but he understands what the movie was doing. This is an entertainment piece, right? And I think that, I don't want to sound too pretentious here, but I think there is like this patronizing attitude of cinema appreciators where they feel like a movie has to hold its entertainment value and standards to a higher level than what I think the basic human soul needs. For example, rock and roll of the 50s till now, verse, chorus, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, whomever, right? If it wasn't good, if it was predictable, then it wouldn't be the most popular genre of music out there. And we wouldn't have rock stars if verse, chorus wasn't the thing that people wanted. How is that different in cinema? Yes, we like to be challenged. Yes, we like to have twist endings. Yes, we like to have things blow our minds. But I think also at the end of the day, we just want comfort food. We want macaroni and cheese. We want to sit down and watch a movie that we don't have to pay attention to, that can just deliver us some entertainment, some laughs, some cries, whatever. And the idea that we are going to chastise that group of movies because it's not original or it's predictable, what happened just to entertainment value? And that's one of the things I've always gotten in debates about with people is the fact that, like, I would rather see a predictable movie that was funny, that was tight, well acted, and performed than an M. Night Shyamalan twist ending that fails, right? He's trying to be daring. He's trying to be unique. But if it doesn't land, people talk shit about it forever. But no one's really going to sit and talk shit about When Harry Met Sally or Sleepless in Seattle, like just these comfort food movies. And I feel that this is kind of one of those movies. It's verse, chorus with some cute animals. Why would we hate on that?
This is a hard movie, I think, for any critic to just look at it and say, I wasn't entertained because I've seen it before. And we get that with the annoyance of critics going to 4, 5, 6 movies at this time in their career where they feel that annoyance. But like you said, it is okay to just give into it. We know it's going to be cheesy at times. We know it's going to be formulaic. But you know what? The casting is fantastic, which even in their review, they don't really address how perfect this is because Matthew Broderick really brings an element of sympathy to the character where he almost matches the looks of our monkey when it comes to realizing emotion. So there is a lot of talent in this movie, and almost I'm a little bit offended that Roger says this isn't a good movie because you know what? If you deep dive into this movie, watch the performances, look at the writing, at this time, for a family movie, it is absolutely kind of brilliant when it comes to all the different elements and challenges this set had to do and what it really had to execute on. So to me, this isn't a good movie. It's a great movie when it comes to the execution of bringing something new to the table when it comes to family movies, of entertaining the family without using gross jokes, fart jokes, an adventure story. This takes two complicated topics, brings it to the table to have a family, not just kids, a family critically think about the situations that happen around them. So I think the kids are getting the assignment. They just can't articulate it with our main
They can't
critics.
articulate it. Well, one of them can, because the next part of discourse I think is very interesting.
What about the bottom line here? Now, how old is your youngest sibling?
She's 9.
9. So we get into the Bambi's mother and Mrs. Jumbo syndrome here. At what age would a kid start really being disturbed by the fact that anybody would want to hurt those cute chimpanzees?
I think everybody would be disturbed by it.
Yeah, but I mean really disturbed, you know.
Well, see, the thing about movies is
I think at about a 4 or 5-year-old.
It didn't push it, right. It didn't push
4 or 5-year-old would
You
really
get disturbed. Everybody gets disturbed, but I don't think
But
anyone's
that's
going to go, walk out of that movie feeling like they've really gone through
But don't you think it's a movie for people like to have a good time, you know? I mean, like
Well-
when we went there, older people like clapping, you know, and like
I don't pay too much attention to the audience when I give my reviews.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very important statement, is that they're talking about how the movie was really good for their whole family. Everyone liked it. And Roger's like, yeah, it's like, okay, so you got the younger kids who are looking at it from the Bambi's mom perspective of like, oh, there's a death from the animal, there's a death in the family. How are we going to learn about death at a younger age after we've gone through all of this cuteness with these animals? And it gives the parental figures or the older generation an opportunity to have that kind of conversation and discourse either in the car home or after the movie is over. And we've talked about this next part very vividly on our show about the audience reaction versus the critical reaction. I think this is the perfect moment to have that conversation because these kids, when they're watching this movie with their family, the family reaction and the reaction of people around them is part of what develops them into cinema appreciators and how to watch a movie with a more enlightening understanding than just as pictures on a screen, right? And Gene shuts it down as a critic. And I get why, because he has to be like, well, I don't let the audience reaction affect my criticism. But this was a perfect opportunity for him to have that conversation of explaining why, not just saying he doesn't. It's like, as a critic, I have to separate myself from what the audience and what your family thinks, where you are literally learning how to watch a movie, understand a movie, and understand what the meaning of it is in a real life situation. So the audience reaction is crucial to you as a kid. There's that gap that I think we've been talking about on our show for the last 2.5 years. That's the gap of as a critic versus how the audience reaction. There should be a connection, and what and when is the moment where you separate that connection.
There's a reason people go to audience reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, IMDb versus critic reviews. There is absolutely how that's evolved. But these comments drive me nuts because I want to attack the first piece of it. And I don't think Roger articulated it properly of when is somebody affected by the death of an animal? Let me just simplify this. Any age on the death of an animal on screen is tragic. You don't have to be 5 years old. If you see a death, I can't think of one in my head that I saw a death of an animal on screen in a family movie that I didn't feel something. That is an easy grab. But here's the deal. We have to be humble enough as adults to say, I'm going to a G movie, a PG movie that wasn't meant for me. I have to be humble enough to look around at people younger than me and see what their reaction is, to see if they're engaged in a scene that I'm not engaged with. If I think, and I'm rolling my eyes with 100 different family movies over the last few years, that I've looked around the theater and seen enjoyment, even though I think it sucks and it's disgusting. But the kids enjoy it. And even though I think movies need more of that audience reaction, we have to be honest with ourselves to just open up and say, this works for kids, it doesn't work for adults, have a conversation after the movie, but it should open up to something bigger other than it sucks for kids, or it sucks for adults, but it's great for kids. This is a perfect opportunity for a critic to say, have a conversation and dialogue with your kids after the movie, even though you don't enjoy it. Because what that sets the tone for is not having a conversation and setting the expectation that you as an adult are not going to have a good time. And that just sucks for the experience.
Okay, so they move on to the next one.
Wild Thing. All right, in this one, you guys gave it 2 thumbs down, and we gave it a C for cool and a P for psychotic. All right, well, okay, this movie, right, it was not one of the best acting movies I've ever seen, you know. It was
Way to go, Matt. You're on. Keep going.
No. I liked it. And I liked it because the killing in this was, like, the most amazing stuff. This little kid runs around killing, like, pigeons with a rake, and he's got this little thing that he, like, shoots rocks at rats. And, I mean, like, he uses an umbrella to kill some Chinese guy. And this was just the most amazing thing I ever saw.
Have you ever in your travels encountered the word hyperbole?
Hyperbole, yeah, it's some big word.
That would be, for example, an example of the guy killing the rats with an umbrella was the most amazing thing you ever saw. There must have been something you've seen that was more amazing.
Well, in the movie, I thought that was great. I haven't seen killing like this.
Mm-hmm.
In
and
like
so
such
you
a long
thought
time.
that was good.
Yeah.
But making love with an android is gross.
Well, I didn't see that
but
movie.
But killing Chinamen with an umbrella is okay.
Yeah, it really is. I have no problem
so
with that.
basically you're just into stimulus, right? If
I'm
it's
just
coming
into
in, you like it.
Yeah, it's because that's the way. I mean, if I'm having a good time, you know, then it's okay.
Well, then you have more in common with the android than you realize.
Hey. That's all right.
This was a movie, cult movie, I remember just seeing it on the video shelf as a kid, and it's one that I chased after for years because it wasn't streaming. I finally found a copy like maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and I lent it to everybody because I think it is a very interesting movie of the 80s. John Sayles wrote it, and I'm a huge John Sayles fan. About this kid who is in a hippie van with his mom and dad, and they get taken out in a drug deal gone bad. They weren't even supposed to be there. And this little baby runs away from corrupt cops, and Robert Davi jumps into the river and is found by Betty Buckley, who is a homeless person, who raises him as like this child of the streets. It's almost like a Jersey Devil kind of thing where Wild Thing has grown up to be this legend of the urban areas of, taking out bad guys, almost like a Batman kind of mythos, but that he is a wild child. And then he's found by Kathleen Quinlan, who's like a social worker, and it turns into, let's say, like a procedural kind of get the drug dealer, get the corrupt cops kind of thing. But the setup is very interesting. Were you familiar with this film at all?
This was a first time watch for me. And, I looked up Roger's review on it, and with one sentence, I can't agree with him more. There is a movie somewhere here. There is an idea. I wasn't a fan of the movie. I can see what it wants to do, but I think the idea is bigger than the execution.
It's definitely bigger than the execution for sure. And I think that they articulate that very well as they're talking about it. Now, of course, I think it's an interesting concept that you do have the teenage kid who is just like Roger says, the hyperbole of it, where you have this larger than life expectation of something and reaction and stimulus to something that is not really in tune with what the movie is trying to say. So when he's saying it's the best thing I've ever seen, I've never seen killing so cool. Well, yeah, there's a lot of cool moments like that in the movie, but it's not by any means the best action sequences. But I think it's important to understand the audience. This is a very important thing for movie studios to understand with shows like this. Is like you're literally hearing what these kids were excited by a film like this. And that's the kind of stuff that goes completely over the heads of most critics as they are telling the parents who will be paying for the movie and driving the kids there what the kids are actually in it for. There is a reason why I think in the 80s and early 90s there was so much push for censorship of violence on TV and lyrics in rap music, because parents were so blinded by what was going on in their kids' life. It's almost like the media and the government had to step in and say, hey, are you listening to what your kids are listening to? Are you watching what your kids are watching, and why? And we still live with the stigma of that. I don't think that most of the violence and sex and language in TV really has any real influence on society, but it's an easy thing to blame when society goes out of control because adults don't want to take accountability for themselves, so they'll blame the media and the music. And this is a perfect example of that, where Roger and Gene don't like this movie. Then they don't say it's overly violent, but Roger does point out the fact that it's like, okay, kid, you don't like the idea of like a romantic connection with a robot. You think that's bad. You think that's unnatural. Yet this wild thing that goes around and kills sewer rats and neighborhood toughs is cool, and it's the coolest thing you've ever seen. Like, I think there is an important conversation there, but it does come off a little bit patronizing. I wish this was a longer form conversation where they could actually come to an agreement and a realization that would bridge the generations and opinions together.
What I think really set this one off for Roger is the passion around the kill. He puts a forte on what he really liked about this movie, which is the kill. And again, we grew up in the 80s. We grew up in the 90s. We've seen movies as 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old of rated R movies, PG-13 movies, and some cool kill scenes. And we haven't had that issue as we grow older of saying, I want to do that. I want to kill. It hasn't happened with the majority of the population when it comes to art, cinema. It just doesn't happen. And this is where I think is a danger. And I think it put almost an emphasis on our two critics, where when they're in front of youth and they're hearing that, up front and center of, I like this movie because of the kill scenes. I liked it. It was cool. That is going to be a wave, a domino effect to almost how they might look at movies going down the road. So they had a big opinion on how movies affected youth and censorship, on so on and so forth. And this episode validated what they thought in cinema. And that shouldn't have any place on how we view movies. You should have access to an extent of how we view different movies.
And you're going to know whether or not it's something for you or not. Like, if it's too violent, you don't like violence, and that's not the movie for you. It's not the genre for you, right? Just like there's people who are really into action horror movies, and romantic comedies and kids films are not for them. It's a double-edged sword, right? It's two sides of the same coin, but it feels like there always needs to be some kind of conflict there. Anyways, they continue.
The point with this movie was, it had a basically interesting idea of this little kid that grows up wild in the ghetto and turns into a superhero, but then it turned in the last half of its length into just total chase and shootout, just like half of the other movies we've seen. How about developing the plot and the characters? What did you think?
I agree with you in the fact that it was like, what's that month? April or May, comes in like a lion and out like a lamb, you know. It started out really great. I mean, I
think
really...
it might be March.
March?
One of them.
Okay.
But April showers make May flowers.
Okay. I meant March.
That bloom in June.
That's right.
What I'm trying to say is it started out really good, and I really enjoyed the first half.
She's right. She's 100% right. And again, she can't articulate it as well. And like they rib her a little bit, which I think is fun. But at the same time, she's also learning something from that. But her viewpoint of what the movie is 100% correct. Where like the first half of the movie is actually really good. And then it just turns into an action yarn. What the movie is about fascism. It is about the blue coats, aka the jackboot soldiers, the corrupt cops. But even the non-corrupt cops are still an aggressive force to the people who are just trying to live, the people who've been taxed to death, the people who are seeing their funding go away. That's shit that we're seeing in the world right now. So there is definitely a relevant conversation in a film like this and what it's trying to say. And that's the point that I always struggle with some of these movies and the critics is like, if the writer was just a little bit better or the director was just a little bit better, the message would make more sense and connect with more people because the message is strong and I think it's important. But if your film can't live up to the message, then not only does it lose the message's credibility, but it almost feels like there's no importance to the movie anymore. And that's how this movie kind of feels, where they turned a really important subject and a really thought-provoking idea into an action yarn in the last 30 minutes, and it kills the credibility. Of course, the social worker is going to get kidnapped and tied to a chair. Of course, Wild Thing has to take out the bad guys. I get it. It's Hollywood suits making decisions for formulaic movies that they've seen work in the past, so they have to emulate that. But it does lose the really cool idea and message and analogy the movie was actually built on. And I think that's my most disappointing part about Wild Thing is that it was such a good idea and it was such a great vehicle to put that message of how we've lived with forms of fascism forever, but turning it into an action yarn at the end kills it. And she points that out. She's like, the first half is great, in like a lion, out like a lamb. I lost attention by the end. And that's a kid talking. But she knew how to at least verbalize what the movie was doing and where it let her down.
Wild Thing wasn't that wild, and I think we get that great idea from the first act where we have the potential of this crescendoing into something savage, something good, something that really has those cool killing feels that not just meant for the cool effect for an adolescent, but even for an adult. One that shouldn't have been PG-13, because when we take a tragedy in the first act and we have a boy that's growing up learning to go against the system, to go against the blue coats, whatever it may be, and learning skills on the streets. There was one point when he's caught in the jail that he's meowing, and every time he would meow, it would make me roll my eyes and then just bust up in laughter, because this isn't a savage man that grew up in the streets. He is meowing in the film, and that just sets the tone of how tame this movie is this guy, and without giving it away, there was a scene where he's swinging from the building towards the climax, and you can literally hear the music in the background just beat, beat, beat. It reminded me of a Las Vegas show where it's just a spectacle with no substance. It was just a show. There is nothing memorable here, and I think time has shown that with this movie. Is this could have been a savage superhero that really did have. I mean, the main co-star's name's Jane, and we have a Tarzan in the movie. Be a Tarzan. Do something memorable on screen. So this movie has a lot of flaws of potential of where it could have gone, but it misses the boat on everything. And it is shocking to me that we have writers in this film from Alligator, Piranha, that just really play it safe, that don't go the extra mile to make this savage.
And that's where it feels like it's a studio decision, right? Where, to me, I'm sure there's a version out there on paper where this movie is very savage, but they're like, no, we got to make it a little bit more family friendly. We got to make it a little bit more accessible to people. And this is the year of the action movie, essentially. We got to make it formulaic too. And that's a problem. But that is a tale as old as time, right? Like, we've seen many movies of great ideas being butchered by studios. Look at Once Upon a Time in America, right? The 4-hour version got a standing ovation at Cannes, and even that wasn't enough to keep a studio from editing it down by like 2.5 hours into garbage and having to wait 20 years for it to be re-released. Like, studios make bad decisions. And, I don't know enough about this movie's history, but it feels, I think we recognize the pattern now of when a studio's put their thumb in a movie's pie and be like, no, we need to make this more formulaic so we can make some money. And at the end of the day, if it's not daring enough, talking about that comfort food, this isn't a comfort food movie. And if it's not daring enough, then people are going to forget about it. And why did I remember this movie and seek it out for all those years? Because of the cover, because of the loincloth dude on top of a skyscraper on the cover art. And that intrigued me because that's what I thought the movie was going to be. And for the first half of the movie, it kind of is. All right. So, like I said, we're not going to cover the last film because the video didn't have the discourse behind it. It was Secret of My Success, which we already covered. But man, I'm telling you, like, this was such an interesting break from our usual scheduled programming of actually seeing them converse with other people. And they're not critics. They're not conversing with other trained, written prestige critics. These are kids, and they are having that conversation between the generations, between the mindsets of what these kids are looking for and appreciating the movie, what the critics are, and then the kids are learning something. And I would like to think that Gene and Roger learned something too. Maybe they did, but we never really saw a lot of that in future episodes. But I really think this is an important piece of media that we're just fortunate exists on YouTube. So we were able to kind of go back, experience it, and then have an hour-long conversation about it.
I think this is absolutely important because this is something I wish we would have now, where it's not just two sets of critics versus a trio of kids. It's an actual dialogue and it's back and forth. That is something that we don't get. And I absolutely felt this as refreshing. I felt that I saw both points of view, even though, as kids, we can articulate as best as we can when it comes to no experience. But these kids did a fantastic job on what they liked and what they didn't like. And honestly, to some aspects, they were open and honest more so than our critics that were just going through the routines of this is not memorable. This is just familiar. This is a trio of kids that have a fresh piece of eyes on cinema that needs to be nourished. And I think they learned something from Gene and Roger. And I don't think you can teach an old dog new tricks when it comes to their criticism. So I think these two almost did more harm than it did good with what they walked away from. But I hope our kids learned something of value listening to these two legendary critics.
I agree with that entire statement. Now, so this was on for like 3.5, 4 years, roughly 4 seasons. And I do vividly remember the change in tone. So like for the first 1.5, 2 years, it was these kids and a few others, like they would have almost like a balcony segment where all of them lined up and they talk with each other across the balcony about what they thought about the movie. The first season, 2 seasons were very much like this kind of free form, open topic, non-scripted, talking over each other, having discourse. it could get a little distracting when you got a bunch of kids talking over each other and trying to be funny, whatever. But there was some genuine feeling in those episodes. Then something happened around year 3 until the end of the run where they tried to be more conventional and everything was scripted. So no longer were they having discourse in a panel. It was look at the camera and read the teleprompter, look at the other camera and read the teleprompter. It felt fake. It was still cool because kids were doing it, and it might have even been written by them or like the idea projected by them, but the genuine freeform discourse was no longer a part of the show towards the end. And I missed that as a kid. I remember vividly seeing that change of like, why does this feel like a news program now where we're looking at the camera and then we're looking at camera B, and then it just didn't feel genuine. So if people have the time and patience to go back and watch some of these episodes on YouTube, because there's a bunch of them on there, this was the only appearance of Siskel and Ebert, but to see the evolution of that show, I agree with you 100%. Like, where is the Jubilee forum for movies with teenagers and kids talking? Like, where is that YouTube channel? Where is that content creation? I know it can't exist. I hope some kid puts it together and makes it happen, because really there's so much of this payola shit where influencers and creators are getting paid by studios to say, I just saw the new movie Primate. It's the scariest movie of the year. We don't believe you because it says sponsored underneath your little handle, right? Where is the round circle of people just wanting to speak their mind about a movie and having discourse with others that's not political, that's not full of bullshit, trigger warnings and stuff like that, but it's a genuine discourse between people? I think that's something that we're missing, and I'd love to see kids put something like that together.
One, Primate is the most scariest movie of the year since it's the first horror movie of the year, so I will just make that statement. But also, what happened with the seasons as they go on is because adults didn't understand it, they didn't like it, they didn't like the structure to it. But give me conversation any day, no matter what age. Have them debate, have them argue, give their opinions, and you know what? There's value to it, even though adults don't get it. Let them talk to the kids directly, and maybe adults will take something away from it in a lot of the chatter that the three talk over each other with. But for the love of God, somebody get a venue out there for kids to talk their opinions on cinema. It's well overdue, and we need it more than 30 to 35-second TikTok clips.
Right. Get kids back in the theater and off of the devices and off of the streaming services. Those movies are garbage, right? Get the theater experience back in the game, and something like that could be what propels it. I love that idea. Well, this was cool, man. This was really cool that we're starting off the new season with some, off the beaten path topics. We got the Rob Reiner episode and then this episode, and we're only a month into the new season. I'm really cool. It's really cool that we're doing that. And we talked about this last week. We've kind of fallen into like a kid window right here, where we just did Alaska, and now we talked about rated K for kids, and we got 2 or 3 more kid movies coming up. So Justin, since he didn't get enough, holiday violence during the December season, decided to bring Home Alone 3 to the show. Now, I've never seen Home Alone 3. In fact, I've never seen any of the Home Alone movies past the first 2. I don't even know how many there are. I'm kind of excited for this. I don't know. Is it a Christmas movie, or is it just a kid at home?
It's been a while since I've seen it. It's a snowy movie, so I don't know if it's not a full Christmas movie, but
he has chicken pox, right?
Yes, chicken pox, Home Alone being sick.
I remember that much of the trailer, is that it is the one where the kid has chicken pox. Okay, I'm actually kind of excited to see this. I'm not going to lie. I'll probably hate it, but I'm actually looking forward to watching it. So Home Alone 3 will be the next show on the episode. And with that, thank you for watching, listening. Please get on YouTube and go check out some of these rated K for kids shows. They're pretty damn cool, especially the Discourse with Siskel and Ebert. There's a lot that I didn't play, but there's a lot of cool conversation that's in there, so go back and check it out. As for us, please like, rate, review, subscribe, give us 5 stars on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Please review, subscribe, leave a comment on our YouTube channel. We still are taking recommendations for the rest of Season 3, so you can leave that in the chat, and we'll get back to you on whether or not we can actually do it. You can find me, Antonio, host of the Cult Worthy Cinema Podcast, over at thecultworthy.com, and my co-host, Justin Henson, is over at
themoviewire.com.
This was a lot of fun. I'll see you next week.
See you next week.